In this training video, we're going to have a look at Gearlog's lists tool. This is probably the single most important tool in the platform, as it will help you to organize your equipment, control access to your equipment, and also perform rapid operations such as inspecting and loaning. There are two other specific videos related to gear lists that you should also view. One on using lists as loaning out equipment, and another on using lists for doing bulk inspections. So do review those videos for those specific processes. In this video, we're going to look at lists more generally, have a look at the options on them and how to use them. To get to the lists tool, we're going to go onto the tools menu and then choose gear lists from the tools menu. Let's just familiarize ourselves with the page a little bit and then get to creating some lists. At the top of the page, we get the option to filter down what we can see on the screen below us. As we scroll down, we can certainly filter down by certain lists, or we can look for only lists which are at a certain location, perhaps lists only created by certain people. As also seen on some of our other filters, we have the option to choose between indented and nested. Nested, the lists are all stacked inside each other, so by opening up a list, we can see the ones that are within it. If we choose indented, we see all the lists organized to each other. As normal, nested is generally better when you've got a lot of lists in a complex hierarchy. Indented is generally better when you've only got a few. Looking at the lists that we see below, we can see for each list, we get its name as site, as in where that list is relevant to, and if you've added one, an icon or a photograph to help that make that list more recognizable. And in a moment, we'll move on to creating a list and give you an idea of some of the options on it. Let's just also note before we do that we also have a tool within Gearlog to enable you to create templates of lists, and we'll look at that at the end of this training course. That's a way for you to be able to specify how many types of certain sorts of equipment should be on lists like this. We'll have a look at that together at the end. So, in terms of looking at the lists that we've got, let's discuss what we might use lists for in Gearlog. There are two primary purposes in Gearlog for a list. The first is we put a large amount of similar equipment together on the same list. For example, here we have a large number of climbing helmets all on the same list. And we're doing that because we intend to manage, potentially store, and probably inspect these together, and putting them onto the same list helps us to very rapidly run that inspection process. And as noted, we have a video which specifically looks at that topic. The other type of list is where we have a mixture of different categories, but the items on the list have a purpose together. So for example, if you were creating a list which was composed of all of the equipment used to build a high wire course, then you'll have all sorts of different categories of equipment on there, but they do have a function together and they are deployed together to create that high wire course. And we would check, inspect and manage them all together as well, on the basis that if any single component was defective or missing, then the system as a whole would be called into question. So just to recap that, two types of lists. Everything on the list is the same, used to make inspection easier. Everything on the list is different and it's used because there's a coherent purpose for that list. And that could be something like a list of equipment all suitable for loaning out. It could be a paramedic's response bag with all sorts of different medical equipment in it. It could be a rescue bag that you've got pre-built with a variety of rescue equipment inside of it. Any one of those mixture lists where you've got some kind of function in mind for that list. Let's look at creating a list now and thinking about what some of the options are on lists and how we could add some equipment to it. We'll just create a simple list for our training course. We'll call it training list. And let's have a look at some of the options that follow. Is this list a template? No, we're going to actually put real equipment on that and use it. And we'll look back at template lists at the end of this training course. You can pick a colour for the list if you like, and also upload a picture, which helps to make the platform look more attractive and makes the lists more visually recognisable when you've got lots of lists on the screen. You can archive lists when you're finished with them, so no need to delete if you think it might still be useful to keep in the future. And there's a filter to show you archive lists that could be returned back afterwards. If you'd like to seal the list when it's built, the idea of that would be we put a number of things perhaps into a bag and then we put a seal on that bag to show that it's been checked and inspected, perhaps a green tag to show that it's been done. We can mark a list as having been sealed, and specifically if you want to, put the tag identifier that's been placed on it. For example, if we put on a green tag with the code 34 on it when the bag was sealed and closed, we can mark it as such. Very useful for things like medical products where we make very careful checks and then close the bag up. We'll take sealed off for now on our training list. If you would like, and have a look at our training video on sites for this, to be able to rapidly deploy this list to some of our quick deploy locations, by turning this on, the list will give you the option to quickly move the whole list to another place. A great example of that could be a bag of rescue equipment that you keep in the warehouse, but you move it into a vehicle. By making this list of rescue equipment quick deployable, we can with one click grab it and move it to a different location. We'll leave that on so we see how it looks at the end. We give you the ability to mark whether lists are active and standby. You may have a couple of copies of the same list, one that is in current use and one that's on standby. We see this a lot in some of our military and police users of Gearlog. If you'd like the list to be offered the choice between active and standby, you can turn that on, and that will quickly let you decide if it's an active or a standby list. List status, active or standby. So now you can choose what it is. We'll make this an active list, but with the ability, as shown above, to also quickly turn it from being active to standby or the reverse. If the list is specific to a particular place, so it tends to live or be relevant at a certain location in your organisation, then you can choose where that would be. If this list changes location and you would like all of the equipment on the list to change location at the same time, then set this option to yes. You'll get a little warning and some information underneath it to explain exactly what will happen to your equipment when you do that. But basically, if you change the location of the list, all of the equipment on the list's location will also change at the same time. If you'd like to stack your lists inside each other, then you can choose where in the hierarchy this should fit. If you would like to allocate a particular owner to this person, and this can be very useful when you mix and match personal equipment with corporate equipment in the same account, you can select the user that this list belongs to, and if you choose to lock it, that means that that user is the only person who can adjust this list and work with the equipment on it. Final setting here about access control. If I set this setting to yes, this means that any user who can see this list can add and remove gear to from it. Not just the person who created the list, but any of your other users will be able to adjust the contents of the list. If you'd like to include any notes on the list, just free text information, then do that just below here. If there's any documents you'd like to attach to the list, could be packing instructions, could be inspection notes for the list, then you can attach them on here. The next two settings are extremely useful. All equipment by default will have its own inspection interval, and you'll set that on the category for that setting. However, you can allow a list to seize control of the inspection schedule for all of the equipment on it. So for example, if we did have a bag of rescue equipment and we want to check that every 14 days, irrespective of the individual schedules we would expect by default on that equipment, we can set it to be checked every 14 days and start that schedule, for example, on the 1st of February. And now the list will override the equipment's inspection, and every 14 days that equipment will be flagged for inspection because of the list that it's on. And that helps to ensure that although disparate pieces of equipment are on the list, they'll all be checked and flagged for inspection at the same time. If you need to provide your users with any particular notes about how to inspect, test or service the list, you can do that here. Please do see our whole video on how to use barcodes, QR codes and near field tags within Gearlog, but do note everything that you can do using tags on a piece of equipment, you can do on a list. So if you would like a barcode on the door to a room, on the outside of a bag of equipment, on shelf edges, then you can do that just as you would for a piece of equipment. So for example, if this were a bag of rescue equipment, you could attach a barcode or QR code to the outside of that bag and scan it to jump straight to the list inside the platform. If you would like to state exactly how many items should be present on the list, then you can provide a numerical value here, and the platform will let you know if there are not the expected number of items present on the list. If the list is of great significance and you have a concern that people could accidentally delete it, then changing this to yes will lock that list and prevent it by any user account, including the administrator, from being deleted. We do have a tool which enables you to clone lists as well, and you can find that tool on the Tools menu, Deep Clone Lists. If you're using that tool, it will expect the list to be clonable, and it will be unless you set the list here to not be allowed to be cloned. If you would like this list to be a reservable list, what we mean by that is it's a collection of equipment which can only be reserved together. Then you can make the list reservable, and it will be offered to your users, do see our video on guest reservations, to reserve the whole list all in one go. Very useful, for example, for pre-built kits of climbing equipment, which are stored together in a small bag, and people can reserve them all at once as a list. And then very finally, at the end, we have a setting for temporary lists. This is a very useful setting where you're only creating a list for some admin, perhaps for catching up on some inspections that were missed, and the platform will then automatically delete that for you at the time that you choose. So you may choose to have it run, be kept for 48 hours, 2 days, and then deleted. There's quite a few options there. Hopefully that's given you a good understanding of how you can create a list and all the various things that you can do with it. Some of those are more complex than others, and the basics would be to give the list a name, to decide who potentially owns it, to think about where the list lives, and to also think about whether you want to set an inspection schedule on the list. Let's save this list and then think about adding some equipment to it. The list is added to the platform. We didn't choose to nest it under an existing list, so it's just down here at the bottom. We can see it currently has 0 items on it, and we can see where that list lives, and we can see that it's been flagged as a temporary list, which will be deleted in 2 days' time. If we want to find more about the settings on the list, we can pop open the details and we'll see all those same options that we just discussed when we were creating the list. Also on the list, as mentioned earlier, the ability to quick deploy this list. Because we enabled that for this list, we can quickly send it to different locations in our organisation. And if we do want to quickly change its status between standby and active, we can do that. We switch that list to standby there. We can now switch it back to active again if it's our hot list. Above that option, we have a series of icons. Let's just cover quickly what those do. The basic rule here is anything you can do to a single piece of equipment, you can do to a list. So for example, you can inspect a list, you can loan a list out, you can reserve a list, you can generate a QR code for a list, you can record a usage for all the items on the list. You can download a list as a spreadsheet, and of course you can edit the list as well and change some of the information on it. Down at the bottom, we also see a couple of useful other pieces of information on the list. For example, how many items are currently on it, the combined weight of the list, the combined value of the items on the list, and if you're using depreciation, the depreciated value of that. Currently, we don't have any equipment on this list, so let's add some equipment to the list. There are a number of ways you can do that. Directly from the list, we can hit plus to browse our equipment inventory, select a piece of equipment, and add it onto the list. You may well decide that you would like to filter the equipment page before you do that to get a quicker build as it's loading up that list for you. Let's just arbitrarily add 3 pieces of equipment to that. You, of course, would be carefully choosing which ones you want to add. What if instead you would rather scan using our app or search using our web browser version to add equipment to it? You can do that simply by clicking the scan or search icon here on the list. If we click that, this will enable us to put in something that we're searching for, run the search, and it will automatically add it to the list of training equipment that we're creating now. Run the search, the piece of equipment will be located and added to the list. If we scroll down on our list now, we can see the 3 that we added manually and also the one that we just scanned on as well. You can also add equipment to a list directly from the equipment page itself. If we take any piece of equipment on it, we can scroll down to its gear list section, and there we have an icon to add this gear to list. And finally, do see our video on importing, but if you're choosing to import equipment into the platform from a spreadsheet, you can add it automatically to a list as you import it, and you would do that using the ID of the list, which can be found just down at the bottom of the list here. We now have a list, we've added some equipment to it, and we've looked in some detail as to how we can add and remove items from that list. Just a note on a couple of the icons that we see here as well. If we would like to look in more detail at a piece of equipment that's on a list, we can click its name and it will be opened below. We can then access that piece of equipment as normal and conduct operations on it, such as inspecting it or editing it. Just to the left of that, we have an icon which will let us swap. This can be very useful if when you come to issue a list out to people, for example a loan list, you decide to substitute a different piece of equipment from the one that they had. You can use this icon to start that substitution process and identify the piece of equipment that you were going to send out instead of the one that was originally on the list. And of course, if you no longer need an item on a list, you can simply remove it by clicking the delete icon next to it. That doesn't delete the equipment, it just removes it from the list. We've now covered how to create lists and some of the options on it. We've covered how to add pieces of equipment to a list and to access those pieces of equipment below. As mentioned earlier, in terms of loaning out equipment lists and in terms of inspecting them, we have dedicated videos for those. So I'd strongly recommend you after this video to go and have a look at our loans and our bulk inspection lists videos, as you'll find those really useful. Let's cover off the other things though here which aren't touched on in those two videos, specifically the rest of these icons here. So as mentioned, we can edit the list, which will pop it back open and let us change all of the information on it just as when we were creating it. We can download that list as a spreadsheet, which will open up Microsoft Excel or your chosen spreadsheet program and let you see that in a spreadsheet format. We already looked at the plus icon and we looked at the scan, which lets us add information to the list. We can also scan equipment off a list as well. So we can search just as we did and it will remove equipment from it. So if we search for the piece of equipment that we added, and this time we'll remove it from the list, run the search, it will be removed from the list, expecting us to then be left with only 2 items on that list. The I is to inspect it. Please go see our video on that. And the tick is to loan it out. So please go and see our separate video on that one. The up arrow will allow you to do a bulk reservation as well. So this will say, I would like to take this list and reserve the whole contents of the list for another user. So for example, if we were to click that list, we can select which user should be making that reservation, when they would like to reserve that list of equipment, when they expect to return it, and then record that reservation as well. So that accesses our reservations tool in bulk for a whole list. If you would like to record usage for this whole list, to say this whole list of equipment was used for something, then click the calendar on it and start recording usage just as you might expect. So for example, we can write a usage record that we use this equipment for a training day, select all the equipment on it and apply that bulk usage. The general idea being here, anything that you can do on a piece of equipment, you can do to a list, and it's much more efficient to use lists of equipment because we're dealing with our equipment in bulk rather than piece by piece. Final couple of options on the list are, if you would like to generate a QR code straight from our platform, you can just click that icon to generate a QR code, which you could then attach to the list. For example, seal it onto the outside of a bag, place it on the outside of a box or a door. Bear in mind, of course, that you can also buy external QR codes or barcodes from a number of manufacturers, which will be tougher potentially than what you can produce and easier to apply to your equipment. Final option on the list is to see the contents of this list as a filter on our equipment page. So if we run that filter, that will take us to the equipment page and it will filter us to the specific list that we're on. When you finish doing that, return back to gear lists using the tools page. Hopefully that's given you a good idea of the different types of lists, those with everything being the same, those with a mixture of equipment, how to create lists, how to add lists, add information to lists, and also to note that we can perform bulk operations on the contents of lists. Let's look at one last feature of the lists tool, which is templates. To set up templates, we're going to switch between the current list view we have now and the template view by going switch to templates. Alternatively, from the tools menu, gear list templates will do the same thing for us. Let's create a template to see how that works. Click add to start creating a template. You'll note by default now this list is a template from which other lists can be created is set to yes. Should you wish to complete any of the other options previously discussed, you can fill those in. But let's create our template list now. The difference between template lists and normal lists is that on a normal list, you identify specific equipment and you add it to it. On a template list, you identify the types of equipment and how many there should be of each. Very useful for organisation activities that you run on a regular basis, so you know you will need certain amounts of certain categories of equipment. Just to give you an idea, let's put a few categories on. For example, on this list, we might decide that we will always want to have 10 pairs of climbing shoes on the list, and we will also add one more to give you a general idea as well. Harnesses for climbing, we would always expect to have 10 of those on it as well. And you could continue to add more items of there. So on our template, we now see the categories of equipment and the expected number. What we can do using this list is then generate actual lists from the template, which will be drawn from our inventory to create the actual list. So if we were to do that on this list, what would happen is a list would be created from the template, and we would expect to find 10 pairs of climbing shoes and 10 harnesses on the list when we create it. If we click that icon, we'll get a prompt as to what will happen. And then a couple of options for us. Specifically, would you like the platform to check for you that you've got enough equipment and to warn you if there's not enough equipment? And would you like to view the list after you've created it? The two default options there are sensible. Let's create the list. As we might expect, the platform is saying, I'm afraid there's not sufficient equipment on there to populate that, so change the amount of it or add new equipment to your inventory. Hopefully that's given you a really good overview of our lists tool and a small taster there at the end also of our templates tool. Lists is a really, really important part of the platform and used extensively all over the platform. If you do have any questions about our lists tool, please get in touch. That's info@gearlog.org.